So, first of all, how are you doing?
I'm good, Aidan. It's nice to see you. As you know, there's lots of things going on right now with coronavirus and other things that kind of capture everybody. But I'm well, and I really look forward to talking with you today.
Yeah, that's actually one of the first things I just wanted to, before we really get started on it, just ask because I can imagine things that down at the NIH and in areas like that are insane right now. And so, how is that?
So I think it's a big adjustment for everybody, Aidan, and I guess in your city even much more so.
Yeah,
But we all, making sure that patient safety and the safety of the staff comes first. We get lots of new guidelines almost every day about what we're doing and how we ensure safety is there. We communicate a lot more like you and I are communicating now. We
yeah.
have, FaceTime, WebEx, Zoom, to make sure that we continue to do the mission critical work. But at the same time, lots of people are teleworking because we don't want, we really want to emphasize patient and staff safety.
Thank you. And so, obviously, the main thing we're going to talk about today is the selumetinib trial. But I think the first thing I really wanted to ask was, can you tell us what led to investigating selumetinib and your history with the clinical trial, which I know is a bloated question?
Yeah, yeah. So, I know you since you've been 3 or 4 years old, I believe. I looked back actually yesterday, and as you know, by training, I'm a cancer doctor for children, and I have been at the NIH for a long time. And at the NIH, my work has focused on developing hopefully effective therapies for children with cancers. But then I noticed that a number of the drugs that we are using and testing in children with cancers actually could have effects that are beneficial to patients with NF1. And this is kind of how my work in NF1 started. And I know you've been, and I hope that's okay to say, you've been participating in trials since you've been a little boy. So we know each other for, at least 15 years. And so after conducting a number of clinical trials, there was some evidence that potentially a MEK inhibitor, which blocks an important pathway in these tumors, could be beneficial. There was data from an animal model in leukemia with NF1, and then also later from Dr. Nancy Ratner in Cincinnati in a mouse model of NF1 that the MEK inhibitors might work. So when we started our trial with a MEK inhibitor, it was with the hope that this might actually work for patients. And you were a participant, I hope it's okay to say that, in the phase 1
Of,
study.
of course.
And uh, as you know, this was the first trial, at least that I conducted, where we for the first time saw shrinkage of these tumors. So the bottom line in your question is, it was after conducting a number of clinical trials that we got to selumetinib, and this was the first one that actually worked, at least to a good extent.
Yes, and I can imagine that it had been very hard to get something like this really off the ground, as we've never really had anything before where we have actually been able to present it to, say, the FDA. Has there been any real struggle doing that?
I wouldn't call it struggle necessarily, but you're absolutely right. This is not easy for a number of reasons. One that was really hard actually in the beginning was to get the MEK inhibitor for NF1. As you know, there are several other MEK inhibitors too. And it was really difficult because the drug companies initially would say, okay, NF1 is not a cancer. The drug may have side effects for these patients with NF1 who do not have cancer. What is the risk benefit ratio? And the second thing was that we wanted to give this medicine to young patients because we know the tumors grow most rapidly in young patients. And so that was a challenge for us. I think it was really hard to get a drug company to buy in to give this to patients with NF1 in the first place. That was a challenge. I think the second challenge that we had was after we shown in the phase 1 study that you participated in, hey, these tumors are actually shrinking. The step as to how do we get this potentially for an FDA approval? And there it was that the FDA told us, look, shrinkage is nice, but you have to show that patients clinically get better. And that was challenging because, as you know, the tumors can be in so many different places. And so we had to design a study that would show the clinical benefit. Those, I think, were two of the struggles or challenges we had.
I would like to just go back to something you said in your last point, which was that I know a lot of people have been slightly confused about it, but so you say that there's more than one MEK trial. I know a lot of people just say MEK, but there's more than one now.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. So let me clarify that. So the selumetinib, that's the MEK inhibitor that we are testing. We had a phase 1 study that was to test the best dose. And then we did a phase 2 study to show the clinical activity. So that's with selumetinib. But there was also a study with a MEK inhibitor called trametinib. There is a study with binimetinib. And there is another MEK inhibitor that's also in clinical testing. So there are actually a number now of MEK inhibitors that have been tested in NF1 and in plexiform neurofibromas and show that these tumors also shrink.
And I do know that a lot of people are becoming a little bit confused about that because they keep hearing the term MEK thrown around. So thank you for clarifying. And really the thing I wanted to ask now is, because as we're talking about how amazing selumetinib is, do you recall the moment when you realized that it was working?
Yes, I actually do. And, you know, Aidan, when you have conducted a number of clinical trials with nothing really working, the first patient that we enrolled on the phase 1 study, after 5 months, we did the MRI, and I could see visibly that the tumor had shrunk some. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, this cannot be true. And I always try to stay very realistic and grounded. So I said, okay, this is the first patient. Let's see, this could be a fluke. Maybe this is not right. But then the second patient, I couldn't wait for the second patient to be rescanned, and we saw the same. And when I thought, okay, we have 2 patients now where we've seen that the tumors shrink at the first evaluation, I would say then I knew that very likely selumetinib was different to other things that I had tried before. And that was really an amazing feeling because it gave me for the first time the hope that we're really onto something that may help patients with NF1.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to tell selumetinib is working. What do you think it will mean if, in the scenario, it does get approved by the FDA for the patients?
What it means for the patients, I think that's a really good question because, as you know, selumetinib is not a cure. Selumetinib doesn't make the tumors disappear. What it does for many patients, it stops the growth and it shrinks the tumor some. And so and it helps patients with symptoms such as pain, sometimes airway function, strength, range of motion. So it makes patients feel better. But I would say for patients, it's really important to know that while this would be a huge step forward, we still have to do a lot more. And I don't want patients to expect that this will take like the plexiform or other symptoms away completely. The other thing, it's important you have to take it. You know, it's a medicine that's taken every day. And you probably, I guess you could speak to that, how difficult it can be to take a medicine twice a day, every day.
Yeah, especially when you are a lot younger in school and in classes, and you can't really build your schedule. Something I've learned personally is that as you get older and you can kind of work and build your schedule, a lot of the time you go to your employer and you say, I'm on this medicine.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, well then I won't give you your set lunch period.
Yeah.
Whatever works. Like you come up with a time that works for your medicine, and then you can just take lunch then.
Yeah.
Like you can, even with school, it's like there's like 50 other kids to consider in your class.
Yeah, you might
You
actually
do
be able
that.
to give great advice to people because you've been on the MEK inhibitor for a long time now, right?
Yeah, yeah. So another thing I would just like to ask is, kind of a little bit less on your weapon and focus is on you, but what made you decide to work with NF?
Um, it really started, Aidan, when I realized that the drugs we're using for cancers might help patients with NF1. And my former mentor, Dr. Peter Adamson, he had actually, prior to myself starting, he had brought a few kids with NF1 for clinical trials that actually were primarily designed for kids with cancer. And meeting these young patients, I realized that while NF1 and the tumors that patients develop for the most part are not cancer tumors, they cause a lot of problems and suffering. So when I got the hunch that there might be drugs that could work for NF1, we started getting into the field. And then I have to say, I got really attached to my patients. And it's a wonderful aspect of being able to see patients year after year like you. I have patients that were little kids that are now grown-ups, and it's very wonderful to see that, Aidan. And so that is another thing that then got me more and more hooked on it. And of course, the lack of our success, because if we had succeeded, I might have stopped with it, but there's so much more that needs to be done.
Yeah. So I would just like to bring it up. As we have discussed, selumetinib is a drug just for NF1. But I was wondering, do you think there can be any benefit for people with other types of NF or fibromatosis through it becoming approved, and maybe the public exposure that could bring?
It's a great question. I do think for sure that it might help people with NF who have some other manifestations. We know already that it can help patients with NF1 and gliomas, so types of brain tumor. There have been studies that show quite exciting, very exciting actually, activity, and there will be a clinical trial that compares in patients with glioma the selumetinib to the standard treatment, which is a chemotherapy. And I look forward to seeing that study very much. It might have patients with skin tumors, the cutaneous neurofibromas. It may help with other NF-related manifestations. There's a study that the Children's Tumor Foundation sponsored or provided funding for to look at cognitive effects. So I think a lot can still be studied for NF. Your question regarding other types of tumors like schwannomatosis or NF2, it's interesting that while these are very distinct diseases, we have seen that sometimes the pathways that are involved might actually be important. So I cannot exclude that selumetinib could have a role, but that should be tested, I think, rigorously preclinically now that we know we have good models, like that we can test it before it goes into patients.
Thank you. And just one last really thing to caveat is there anything you'd like to say to community as a whole with the way the future looks for?
Yeah, I would like to say thank you, Aidan. I feel every success and progress is the result of the NF community working together. And the biggest thing for me goes to the patients, like you, people that participate in research that have not given up when we did not succeed. I feel the NF community is very special. And maybe that's because that's the community I know the best, but people really work together. When you as young people went to the FDA and talked to the FDA to educate them about NF1, that was a highlight. And when I saw that, and in particular that you participated and I knew you, I feel the groups that are supporting the research work together. It's not working against each other. So for me, it would be a huge thank you. And I think if the NF community continues to do what we're currently doing, we will make additional progress, Aidan, that will hopefully result in even much better results than what we've accomplished to date.
Well, thank you so much.
Well, I thank you, Aidan. I think it's wonderful that we're talking together, and it's actually really nice to see you.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to do this.
I enjoyed, Aidan. I really do. This was probably the highlight for my day today. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much. Well, have a nice day.
You too, Aidan. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.